Welcome to the Cloud Foundry Diversity Luncheon. I'm Caitlyn O'Connell. I run content and diversity programming for the Cloud Foundry Foundation. I can't believe it, but it's the 6th diversity luncheon I've hosted. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Take a look around the room. This is your community, whether or not you're technical, regardless of your first language or gender identity, whether you've been to the diversity luncheon before or this is your first time, you're welcome here. We have a really fantastic lineup of speakers today. First on the schedule is a talk from Pivot's Nikita Rathi and Katrina Bakas on fighting for fair, ungendered feedback. Nikita, a software engineering manager, and Katrina, a senior product manager, will discuss the ways in which men and women are evaluated differently in the workplace and provide practical tips on how to overcome your own unconscious bias, regardless of your gender. Please welcome them both to the stage.
Nice. Hello. Thank you all for being here. I'm Katrina Bakas. I am going to be talking with Nikita about getting fair, ungendered feedback. We have some trigger warnings and some content warnings for you before we get started. We know that gender is not binary. However, in academic research, it's often referred to as men's feedback and women's feedback, so we're going to be using those terms. All right, why is this topic important? Why should anyone care about it? Feedback is key for all of us. It's how we grow, it's how we get better, and it's how we advance in our careers. For URMs or underrepresented minorities, it can also be the thing that kills our careers or makes us go elsewhere or leave a field. Therefore, it's one of the most important things we do at work, and yet it's one of the worst things, or it's one of the things that we're all worst at. As I mentioned, I'm Katrina Bakas. When you have your co-presenter take some liberties with your intro, you end up with something like that. Thanks. All of those things are true.
And I am Nikita Rathi. I moved from Nepal to a country with way less cool flag, might add, Ireland. And I'm an engineering manager in Dublin. So I want to start by talking about feedback I received early on in my career. My manager said, Nikita, you had a great year. The only thing is just speak more in meetings, be more confident, and be more assertive. I just want to go into this a little bit. I had, the outcome of that meeting was that I got a 2% inflationary raise, but I had a great year. So it was a really vague compliment. I didn't know what I did that was great, what I should keep doing. It was primarily focused on my communication style, but I had just taken on a new role. It was a DevOps role, and my first ever, software development job. I wanted to know how I was doing technically, but unfortunately, all of my feedback was related to my communication style. We spent 90% of the meeting talking about, the critical aspects of the constructive feedback. And I've built an entire identity around being bad at communication. I'm still undoing this, 6 years later. None of this was actionable. I didn't walk out of that meeting being just gonna walk into a room and be more assertive. If only that was, I wish that was a thing. I'm just gonna be confident, it'll be great. I wish someone had said oh, go speak at a conference, where people want to hear you and are listening to you. Also, I feel like a lot of people get told to speak more. I wish more people got told to listen more. So my experience wasn't unique at all. I was not special. Lots of folks in the industry have heard similar things. This is just like some examples of things that people might hear, like underrepresented minorities at work. Can I have a show of hands of anybody that might have heard something like this in their career? And can I have another show of hands for folks that might have delivered this kind of feedback to somebody? Cool. Yeah, exactly. There's a large body, so you're not alone. There's a large body of research that has looked into this, gendered feedback. In one study, women received 2.5 times the amount of feedback about aggressive communication style, 1.4 times more likely to receive critical subjective feedback. More references to team accomplishments over individual accomplishments, half as many references to technical expertise. The gender of the reviewer or feedback giver does not matter. So we are all susceptible to give gendered feedback, no matter what you look like. Why is that? We know why, society. So given this is the gender spectrum, there's a damaging assumption that because historically women have assumed subservient, like community-focused roles, women possess communal traits, so being caring and empathetic. There's an equally damaging assumption that men, historically, having assumed positions of power, having been decision makers, demonstrate agentic traits, so like being assertive, independent, self-profitable. So, yeah, so studies have found that regardless of gender, people have a clear preference for agentic traits in a leader, even though it has been proved that communal traits are actually equally important, if not more. This is stereotypically associated with men. So while the workforce is catching up, women find themselves walking a tightrope between fitting the perception of what a woman looks like versus what a leader looks like. So be more assertive, be less direct. In tech, it's even more difficult because I'm not just an engineer, I'm a female engineer. So people come to talk to me, they already have like an entire idea of what kind of engineer I will be just because of how I look and how I dress sometimes. That's a lot of pressure, y'all, to like, be representing an entire demographic. So if I was up for like a promotion or a different role, I wouldn't just have to be 100% ready. I have to be 150% ready. This is something I hear a lot. I'm a manager, and I have 2 reports that are underrepresented minorities. And I often hear like things like they're not ready or like not experienced enough, also known as the prove it again bias. This is often this happens often when you're not present in the room. So gendered feedback can be used to justify lesser pay. People get passed up on opportunities. We internalize critical feedback, and that adds to the levels of imposter syndrome that we already feel. And it contributes to the really high quit rates for URMs in technology, URMs, underrepresented minorities. Yeah, so I'm going to hand it over to Katrina.
We know that all of this information can be quite daunting. It's difficult to accept that this is the reality that we live in. Yet it's not hopeless. There are things that we can all do about it, whether we're contributing to the problem or experiencing the problem, and oftentimes doing both. So we have some tools and tricks to show you how to fight it, or how to spot it first, and then how to fight it. Remember that everyone in this room is valuable and worthy of being here and doing whatever you're doing with your lives. Remember that you deserve to be in any room that you're in, and if you feel like you can't, it's probably because someone else has made you feel that way, and not a value judgment of yourself. If you're a manager, you must remember this as well. Remember that the people that you are managing and growing and helping and giving feedback to, even if you're not a manager, are also worthy and valuable and they deserve you doing this well because it will have an impact on their lives. There are situations that happen often that I wonder if anyone else has experienced. Have you ever had a review that you thought was completely different than how you thought you were performing in a role? As Nikita mentioned, she felt like she was making some great technical contribution. She had really grown in her role, and yet her review focused all on communication style. Do you see women in other URMs graded on communication and people skills, not technical skills? Do you ever see, for example, engineers high-five each other over a really great code push or something like that, and yet criticize the other for how they spoke about that celebration or something like that? Has anyone ever experienced a situation like this? Or perhaps another situation that's similar is I've gotten feedback before myself that, I wasn't ready for a promotion because I was already doing too much, and it was too valuable of work that I was doing at a time, so my role couldn't change. And yet other people are often rewarded for the potential that they exhibit to do better things, which is bizarre. If you've been through any of these situations, whether you were the giver or the receiver, you've been experiencing gendered feedback. This harms men just as much as it harms women. It harms men who don't necessarily want to walk into a room and exhibit agentic traits by default. It harms men who listen before they speak. It harms men who become bullies because they think that's how they can be leaders. It harms all of us. When faced with it, understand that this is demeaning and degrading and frustrating. It's okay to experience all of those emotions. So flip some tables, blow off some steam, then fight it. This is an important line, and I'm going to read it word for word. This goes for you too, folks in position of power. Do not put the onus on victims to make things right. If a situation is unfair, and it's unfair because of a behavior that you're exhibiting, don't expect the victim to call you out on the behavior that you're exhibiting. Do some self-work to realize what impact you might be having on the situation. Some ways that we've found to be really effective in having better, unbiased, ungendered feedback are these. I'll go into each one of them and give a little bit more information about each. Frequency of feedback is really key. You have to give feedback constantly, and we should also be soliciting feedback constantly. It's how we grow. Once a year or every half year during performance reviews is not enough time to be able to grow and evaluate and talk about things. Establish a connection with feedback givers about how important feedback is to you, and as the feedback giver, establish why it's important that you're giving someone this feedback and how you're hoping it helps them grow. Medium is also really important. While we as humans tend to rely a lot on verbal communication and body cues and things like that, it's also extremely subjective. Writing gives us all a chance to express our thoughts clearly, read them often in black and white, and make amends with those thoughts, and then determine if they really were what we meant to say at the time. Once you say something, you can't really take it back. When you write it, you can edit it, digest it, make sure that you can come back to it. So a mechanism that I really like is talking about feedback first so I can get that kind of a human emotional response, and then following up with it in writing. And I can't tell you how many times what I got in writing was not what I heard in person, and it's great to be able to clarify that. Which brings me to my next point. Clarify and crystallize your feedback. When you receive feedback, a good mechanism might be to repeat it back to the feedback giver. Say, this is what I heard you say. Is that right? This is really important to me. It matters for my career. So I want to make sure I got it right. Schedule follow-ups. A one-time communication cadence isn't enough. If you received some feedback or even a compliment that you didn't quite understand, ask about it and schedule more time to dedicate to a conversation. Especially when you get pieces of information in passing, it's important to dedicate time and come to the same room with the same objective with the feedback giver or the feedback receiver, depending on which end of the spectrum you're on. The last bullet point was key for me. Cross-reference your feedback with peers that you trust, not just any peer. It has to be someone that you trust and will give you their valid opinion on what the situation is that you might be experiencing. In the case when my manager told me that I was doing too much and it was too valuable, so I couldn't get promoted, I didn't realize that was unfair feedback. So what I did is I went back, inventoried the last 4 weeks of everything I had done, every meeting, wrote up a spreadsheet, presented it back to my manager, and I said, I'm doing too much and I would really like to get promoted. What things can I stop doing in order to make room to get promoted? Somehow I was like, yes, that's correct. I just have to do this, fine. And it wasn't until I talked to someone else and made the offhand comment, like, oh yeah, I'm working really hard on my time management because clearly I'm bad at time management, and this is the thing. And they said, what are you doing? You're inventorying the things you do? I was like, yeah, isn't that like a normal thing to do, to reflect on? And they said, what was the actual feedback that you got? And I gave them the situation, told them that phrase. And they said, Katrina, you realize that's bullshit, right? I said, no. And now I've wasted all of this time trying to validate the bullshit feedback rather than just clarifying it and understanding that it was bullshit to begin with. I didn't actually ask if I could say bullshit, so I apologize in advance. This one's the hardest for me, and often the hardest for URMs. Find ways to celebrate your success. It doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be extremely proud. I talk about things, I have a little sister who lives with me who is effectively, I'm responsible for her effectively, and we talk about high-fiveable moments. What's one thing that at the end of the day we can high-five about? It can be something like I held the door for someone and they said thank you and it made me feel really good. It can be I was really stressed out about a test and I got a B and I thought I was going to do way worse. And that's a great high-fiveable moment. For me, it can be a great conversation with someone. It can be supporting someone throughout the day. It can be having solved a really difficult problem that I was working on. What's important here, too, is to lean on your network. Celebrate your successes with others so that eventually those become viral and more people hear about them, and you can get that good exposure. If you're someone who's in a position of power and influence, encourage other people to celebrate their successes. Call them out. Ask people. Say, what did you feel good about doing this week? Solicit that feedback yourself so that you can make the case for why people are so great around you. I challenge you to think about one thing that you've done this week that you're really proud of, and it can be anything. I got here this week and I went for a run even though I was exhausted, and I was like, hell yes, I hate running. It's done. And that was something I was really proud of, for example. Maybe you gave a talk and got through it and felt really good about it. When you keep track of your goals in writing, as I mentioned in the writing medium, it's easier to be able to reflect on them and then come to your situation celebrating your successes. So jot things down also. When you are reflecting on yourself and giving yourself feedback, it's a really great mechanism to celebrate your successes by looking at the quick notes that you've taken down. And finally, lean on frameworks when you're in a feedback situation with another person. There are two that are really good. It's the SBI model, is situation, behavior, and impact. One that we use at Pivotal often is task. Feedback should be timely, actionable, specific, and always kind. Just because it's negative feedback doesn't mean that you have the right to be mean about it. Be objective in every case that you can. If you can't clearly define what the situation was, what the behavior that the person to whom you're giving feedback is that they exhibited, and what the impact of that behavior was, it's probably not worth mentioning. Do the work it takes to give good feedback. And ask for people to give you good feedback too. These are great situations. If someone says, hey Nikita, the team is really awesome because of what you've done, say, oh, what have I done? Can you give me examples? I'd really like to do more of those things. Oftentimes, positive feedback can sound like it's a good thing, even when it's not. Has anyone had comments like this given to them? You're really dedicated to the product direction. I might take that to assume that my dedication is being recognized by all the hours I've put in. Maybe I've been working until 10 p.m. every night. But really what the person is saying is, I can tell that you think about things and you tie the pieces together, and it's contributing to a great product direction where we're moving forward and we're delivering outcomes for our customers. But that is so subjective that it's up to my interpretation to determine what actions are leading to this. Likewise, you've been really collaborative and supportive. What does that mean? I played nice? How do I do more of that? It should be repeatable. Here's an example of a really great piece of feedback. This is an unreadable slide on purpose. It's just to show you how much work it takes to actually get really good and really actionable and really clear feedback. It starts off with a positive right off the bat. It lets the manager know what's coming. This situation is someone giving feedback to another person's manager because the interactions they had with them were so valuable and it taught them so much. So they open the email by saying something like, "You really want to read me? I'm going to brag about one of your employees." It doesn't exactly say that, but it's close. And then the situation, behavior, and impact are clearly explained. The person giving this feedback followed that format to a T. They thought, I'm going to make this as objective as I can so that there's no question about how this was positive. And then they actually gave the example of everything they had done and gave the output of their work together so that, again, it was able to be referenced back. Here are references. We hope that you have some better tips, tricks, and ways of fighting unbiased or ungendered feedback. We hope you have more awareness of yourself in these situations as well. I'm as guilty as anyone else of not often thinking clearly enough about the feedback I'm going to give and not challenging the feedback I receive. I encourage everyone to practice. Please feel free to ask us more questions or our experiences as well. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. It was a really great talk. Next up, we have a lightning talk from Dr. Xiujiao Gao, client lead and senior cloud engineer at Stark & Wayne. She earned her PhD in computer science and engineering at the State University of New York at Buffalo. And Dr. Gao will present on how stereotypes are created and how we can overcome them to build an even better community. Please welcome her to the stage.
Thank you. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Caitlyn, for the introduction. I would like to share a bit more of personal information before I start talk about stereotypes. I'm in love with Bosch, CF, Conkers. The list can just keep on going. My point is that I'm a nerd, female tech nerd. As you can see, I'm a Chinese. So you already know, I'm very good at math. So you can test me with any math problem. It's impossible that I don't know the answer. If you would like to give a try, please raise your hand. Okay, the guy with the red dragon shirt.
What is 5 plus 6?
5 plus 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops, not enough fingers. It will be awkward if I use my toe. So let me get my calculator. 5 plus 6. I got it, 12. See, all Chinese are good at math. When I meet with new people, one of the questions they often ask is, are you a student? What's your major? Oh, I got my PhD degree in CSE, Computer Science and Engineering. Wow, really? So they will be so surprised. They look at me like, impossible. You don't look like a PhD in CSE. I totally understand their reactions because in reality, majority of PhD in CSE are guys. So we tend to link PhD in CSE with males, not female, not even both. Our brain likes to categorize things. We like to simplify things so that we can make a very quick prediction-based judgment. I have a dream. I want to show the world that there are good female PhD in CSE. There are good female engineers. There are good female engineers who wear beautiful dresses, high heels. So one time at an event, I was the only female there. I was wearing my beautiful dress, high heels. A guy came up. Hey, are you the event organizer? Do you know where are the bottled water? Oh, yeah, right over there, behind the coffee. Then, I think you already see where this is going. So then the event started. The host introduced me. as the guest speaker. Then the guy who asked about the water, his face was bright red. He's like, oh my. It was super awkward for him. So, but I don't blame him. Here is why. I was the only female in the room. I didn't dress up like any other guys in the room who rotate their conference t-shirt from Monday to Sunday. And if you are not Chinese, you see Dr. Xiujiao, you have no idea that's a girly name. So, yeah, so at other events, I start to make some change. I wear a t-shirt in front said, instant engineer, just add coffee. Let you know, I don't really drink coffee. Maybe some decaf once in a while. And on the back, it says, I code every day. That helps some, because if you see a girl like me, like this jeans t-shirt, she may be a good engineer. Look, she probably focuses more on tech than beautiful dresses. There's a higher chance she's a good one. I made my compromise. But what about my dream? Now it's time I ask you for a favor. Let's do a very quick guided meditation with a twist. So please close your eyes. Sit comfortably. Listen to my unique, charming Chinglish. Close your eyes. For real, close your eyes. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Breathe in and out. Think about the stereotypes in life. Think about the stereotypes at work. Think about the stereotypes in this community. Think about how those stereotypes may not be true. Think about how those stereotypes may make others feel uncomfortable. Think about how those stereotypes may even hurtful. More importantly, think about what you can do to make it better. Don't let stereotypes trick you, because what you think you see may not be true. Don't let stereotypes define you, because you are the only one responsible to make your dream come true. When you are ready, please open your eyes. So, I really love this. That opened the door for everyone. So, please talk with me, talk with each other, keep the positive energy going in this room. Ta-ta, I am possible, and so are you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gao. That was fantastic. Our last session of the event is going to be a panel discussion on the topic of ethical tech. Before we get started, I want to provide some context for this conversation. The ethics of tech are something I ruminate on daily. Just ask my colleagues. It's a topic so cavernous, it can be hard to see from one thought to the next. What does it mean for tech to be ethical? Who is the arbiter of tech ethics? Can we make ethical tech even when the tech industry itself is not ethical? And what does this have to do with the diversity luncheon? Well, lots. When I was trying to come up with a simple definition of ethical tech, I landed on tech created to be accessible and inclusive, with a mission to improve the human experience or the natural world without generating new anxieties, distractions, dangers, destruction, or conflicts. Easier said than done, right? There are so many steps within that one definition, from the gestation of an idea to who it's created by, to who it's made for, to how it's marketed to them, to what the immediate and long-term impacts are on the user, the maker, the local community, the broader community, and the world as a whole. Take the easiest example in front of all of us and in many of our hands right now, our smartphones. It's a miracle, and it's become indispensable. It's replaced a map, a credit card, a camera, a calculator, a compass, a notebook, a Walkman, a phone book, and it also has tangible effects on our brains and behavior. Those notifications on our phones are causing our brains to be in a nearly constant state of stress and fear by establishing a stress-fear memory pathway. Smartphones are transforming how children are being socialized. Now, of course, no app developer sets out to agitate her users' neurological pathways or reduce empathy development in kids. But success is often measured by time spent on an app. So how do we redefine success to cause less anxiety and distraction in people's lives while still building the best possible products? Let's zoom out and check the tech industry at large, a powerful visionary industry filled with dreamers and makers that has in many ways neglected its neighbors. Tech companies congregated in a single city by the bay, and as a result, local businesses and longtime residents were forced out as prices skyrocketed. Was this intentional? Certainly not. But how far do ethics get pushed aside before someone says, wait, we caused entire communities to disappear, and disproportionately communities comprised of ethnic minorities? When the industry itself is not inclusive, how can the technology itself be? A final example, social media. These platforms have forever redefined democracy, with the proliferation of foreign hackers meddling in global elections and both real and fake stories posted over and over in an echo chamber while our personal data is harvested. What is each of our personal responsibilities to stop participating on these platforms? What does self-regulation look like when total industry regulation isn't required? A recent New Yorker article on the topic of tech ethics quoted Tristan Harris, the co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, as saying, in the 70s, you had people talking about pollution, other people talking about acid rain. It didn't become a climate movement until there was holistic language to show how it all fit together. I've mentioned only 3 disparate examples here that impact us in different ways. There's the issue of inclusivity, which impacts hiring practices and work culture, not to mention the tech development itself, which overlaps with accessibility and the need for technology to be created with many abilities in mind. You've got privacy issues and the more insidious long-term impacts on our mental, political, physical, and social development. That's a lot. We don't yet have a shared vernacular for how these interplay, and I think we talk about them as though they are siloed issues a lot of the time. But I think all of these topics relate back to the ethics of technology. Today's panel discussion is going to be a conversation with 3 conscientious individuals learning their way through this brave new world of technology. I know all of us who are part of the Cloud Foundry and extended open source communities want our work to have a positive impact on the world around us. And I'm excited to hear from our panelists what steps they're taking to ensure they're helping to move towards a more ethical tech. Please welcome to the stage Paula Kennedy, the director of Pivotal Cloud Foundry Solutions, where she is focused on working together with clients to drive innovation, transformation, and business outcomes. Steve Greenberg, the founder of Resilient Scale. He's focused on helping customers increase their skills and improve their organizations through collaboration and coaching. And Katrina Bakas, the senior product manager at Pivotal. Welcome back. Hi.
Hi. Hello.
Thanks for joining me today. So just to get started, how do you define ethical tech? And what components of technology possess an inherent ethical quandary? And how do you navigate that at all stages, from ideation to development to implementation? Just like a late question.
I think, to your point of what you just spoke about, ethics is such a big topic. It's hard to know where to start sometimes, and it can feel very overwhelming. And I think, sort of from ideation to creation, like the whole process, a thing I try to think about is, like, what's my end stage? What's my goal? Am I having a good impact or not? And you mentioned sort of those unintended consequences. I think that's a thing that's really hard to predict because, let's say, people did not intend to move people out of San Francisco. People did not maybe even foresee that sort of thing could happen. I think in this day and age now, we know that positive intent does not equal positive outcome. And so it's important to try and ask yourself the question, what are the unintended consequences? What do I think? What's the worst case? If I build this thing or I do this thing, what's the actual worst case that could happen? And maybe try to ask that question before starting is maybe the best place to start.
Yeah. Steve, what about you?
So for me, when I think about ethics, it always comes back to people. And so I agree with you 100%. It's such a big topic because think about the people involved, right? And you've hit on people getting moved out of neighborhoods, which is just a whole new category, right? It's not just the companies and the people and their actions within those companies that are building the software. It's not just the users, it's everybody. And it is overwhelming. And I think we have to kind of understand the complexity of that kind of going into it. And it's a tricky thing.
Definitely. Katrina, what are your thoughts?
When I think of ethics, I think of doing the right thing for everyone to the extent that it's possible. Oftentimes in tech, we exclude groups of people, hopefully unintentionally, but sometimes you opt into ignorance so often that it becomes intentional. So for me, the first step is being aware of what's happening and understanding that we have a responsibility in technology, because technology is everywhere. We kind of tend to, I'll only speak for myself, I tend to think about technology sometimes as building really incredible things and solving problems that only a certain subset of the population can possibly solve. But tech is everywhere. It's everything nowadays. We're 2019, for heaven's sake. It's everything. And the sooner that we realize that, the sooner we can measure the impact of the decisions that we're making.
Yeah. So how do you ensure that tech is created ethically? And we see all of these companies moving towards having ethics divisions and departments within the organization. Who gets to be the arbiter of morals in a tech industry?
I might make a slight nuance there. I think this is my naive perspective, but I think that ethics and morals are often different. I think morals are more contextual and ethics are more universal. If there's someone who knows more English than I do, please correct me if that's absolutely wrong. So I think in ensuring that we're doing the right thing, I would advocate for a product mindset, obviously, as a product manager, of consider the user and the impact that you're trying to drive. And as Paula mentioned, imagine the worst case scenario. I think of regulating tech and ethics much like hospitals do and medicine has. There's the Hippocratic Oath when you practice medicine. There are also boards of ethics that regulate hospitals just as much as regulators exist in other aspects of medicine. We could have the same thing. It also starts with studying it. We have to understand what impacts we're having so that we can implement the right regulations. I don't think it should be up to any one person or one council of people to solve those problems. It has to be a crowdsourced education solution. And we have to go in with the goal in mind of making it more ethical, so define what that means.
Yeah, I agree. And what about you, Steve? What does regulation look like for you and the arbiter of, and who is the arbiter of ethics in tech?
Yeah, I mean, this is a hard question to answer, quite honestly, just because the world seems pretty evil and disgusting today, right? And these are people that are in charge. And so can we have those kind of governing bodies? I mean, I really think it is crowdsourced in that the people in the know and the people that care have to be the ones that speak up and push for that change. And like you said earlier in your talk, just keep fighting, every time you see those injustices. I think that's the only way things will actually happen.
Yeah, I think of the employees at Google who pushed back against creating the
Exactly.
browser in China. I mean, have any of you ever faced something like that in the workplace where you push back against a decision being made because you don't think it's right?
At least, in Pivotal, we are always given an option for projects that come in. Anybody has the option to opt out if they don't want to work on a particular thing, which is fantastic at Pivotal. But it's also not black or white. There's difficult decisions to make where you might say, for example, you might choose that you don't want to work on a project for a government entity because you don't believe in the thing that they're doing. But the actual project could be a thing where, for example, it's saving that government a huge sum of money. Like, they're doing something that's wasteful. By building this thing, you're going to save them loads of money. They can then spend that money on people that need it more. So it's, I think everything is sort of subjective, but you have to consider each thing individually, almost. And I think, to your point of like regulation, how would you regulate it? Like if there was an ethics person in your company who decides we will work with these companies and we won't work with these companies, I don't think it's as clear cut as that,
Right.
quite honestly.
And what if you don't agree with that person?
Absolutely. And it's sometimes, I think it's, regulation is important, but also kind of that self-choice, the opportunity to choose for yourself. And like you mentioned, the Google walkout, like employees chose that they didn't want to do the thing, so they walked out, and that sent a very powerful message, I think, to all of us, actually. Like, we all have that power to make choices for ourselves. And sometimes, I mean, I have conversations with people about whether we should be unionized in tech. Like, should we all form together and form a union, and then we can take the power for ourselves? Whether we need to go that far or not, I don't know. But we do have power. We have agency for ourselves. We can make those choices.
And I know you and I have talked a bit about ways in which you can self-regulate, choosing particular partner companies to work with, or deciding to work with organizations that have a specific mission in mind. Can you give some examples of choices you've made like that?
Yeah, like I say, it's for me, it's not always a simple answer, I would say. And I'm always trying to think about, like, who are the people, like to Steve's point, who are the people that I'm working with? Who are the people that I'm helping? What's the thing I'm trying to do? Why am I trying to do it? We make choices all the time, every single day. So I try always to be very open-minded. Like I say, the choice of, do I want to work on this project? Well, let me find out about it before I decide. And then if I don't think it's the right thing, don't do it.
Can any of you give some examples of companies that maybe set out to create a product or something that they thought was going to have a really positive impact and then ended up having a negative impact, and maybe how they could have gone about it differently to envision the long-term effects?
A few come to mind. I'll give you a relatively benign example. At Pivotal, in our R&D department, we have this really silly ramp-up period that we say when you get hired. Often, when I got hired, they said it'll take you 6 months to understand anything that's going on, and then you can like really start delivering value. It'll be 6 months. And I thought, we're reveling in overcomplication, which pushes people out of the conversation because often it's really intimidating. It is horrible to come into work for 6 months and feel like you're not good at your job, and it's like the expectation. Pivotal didn't set out to overcomplicate things, but we've sort of leaned into that idea that things are just really complicated and it's hard to understand, but it makes it inaccessible to people who don't feel comfortable kind of fleshing out overcomplication and simplifying topics. That's a really small example, but it's one that harms almost every new hire that comes in and has to grapple with this idea of, do I want to feel inadequate at work every day for 6 months before I understand a thing that's going on around me? On the other end, I think Facebook is the example that comes to mind for me. I don't think in their wildest dreams they thought they would arrive at this place today, but I think going back to what they said earlier, it's tripping into things by accident and not recognizing the harmful impact that you're having. And the biggest problem that I have with Facebook is that they don't seem to admit that they've created this terrible situation that they've created. They keep saying that they're doing only good things, and that's harming a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was going to say Facebook, but I'll say Twitter instead. And I think part of the problem is people end up getting drunk on money. They start making money, and then they just don't pay attention anymore, and they just don't care, and then it spirals out of control, and then you got massive social engineering happening to the detriment of the world on Twitter, on your platform. Which, look, they just wanted to be able to tell you when you were walking your dog or something, and share pictures. Like, that was the goal.
It's funny. I have a friend who's in a startup for a new social network, so it's like a new Twitter.
Great.
And the idea behind it, so I've been talking to him a bit about what he's doing. It's an anonymous social network aimed at connecting people who identify as women. Okay, so it's a sort of a women-based anonymous place, safe space is what it's aiming for. And we've been chatting about like the idea and what he's trying to achieve, etc. And today, I can tell you, his intentions are pure. Like the whole company, like they genuinely want to create a safe space online for women to connect, to share their thoughts and their feelings, etc. We were talking then about, because it's anonymous right now, and they're thinking about how they might allow people to also have a profile so they can connect in person if they want to. So we had a long discussion about it. Anyway, the intentions are pure and good, and I really think it's a fantastic idea. And then we were talking about, well, you know, we're not going to end up like Twitter, was the conversation that we had. And my response was, well, I don't think Twitter wanted to end up like Twitter. No. Like the original intent of Twitter, open forum, people can have their voice, people can speak, it's free, we're not going to be like shutting down kind of people's freedom of speech. And again, I think the intention for Twitter was good, amazing. It's just the way it's ended up, those unintended consequences. I mean, now it can feel like a very hostile place. And we mentioned like kind of social engineering and data, and there's so many things that are potentially dangerous with Twitter, but it didn't set out to be that way.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about, you know, once something that was created with good intentions gets to that point where you start to question its impact, whose responsibility is it then to change the tides? We've talked a little bit about data servers and the environmental impact that they're having. How do we change that when that's the norm?
This was an interesting conversation we had around when computers started becoming more and more powerful and we started building these massive data centers that suck in tons of environmental resources. It doesn't seem like we've often reflected on that to say, is this really the right thing to do? It's great that we have more powerful computers, but why aren't we also simultaneously offsetting the power of those computers in other ways and the damage that they cause? I don't have good answers other than begin with awareness. Like the people who are creating those more and more powerful computers have an awareness of where that power is coming in. We have discussions in similar veins around buying an electric car, for example. Where I live in Denver, Colorado, our power is supplied by coal. So even if I were to buy an electric vehicle that is charged, it's still being ultimately powered by coal. So I'm not actually having the impact that I think I'm having by not consuming fuel. That's information that I had to go seek out, though. It's easy to sort of just go, it's not easy. It would be, I would feel good about going out and buying an electric car if that was an option that was financially available to me. But then I would still not be having the impact that I thought I was going to have. And I think we don't make those same evaluations. We instead sort of pat ourselves on the back for doing the really cool thing of building a superpowered computer and then stopping. And
what part of, where do you see the intersection of ethical tech and inclusivity and accessibility?
I think ethics are all inclusivity and accessibility. At the beginning you asked what's the definition of ethics, and I think it's making the right thing for all people to the extent that it's possible, and not being lazy about to the extent that it's possible. So in this example, we're excluding the populations of people that, for example, live near the data centers or are displaced by data centers or are polluting water supplies to cities because of the way that we cool down data centers and the water becomes unpotable. By not thinking about what those impacts are, we can't mitigate what those impacts are.
I mean, for me, I'll keep it simple. I mean, it goes back to people. Both of them are related to people, right? And there's obviously a lot of different places and levels that we can apply, you know, our ethics and our morals. You know, I just wish, you know, I guess people in the world today would think about somebody other than themselves, but even that's hard sometimes, right? Because everybody's fighting their own struggles and their own battles. Right. So.
It does feel like, Katrina mentioned it, so it's 2019, technology is everywhere, like it's literally everywhere. For us, we're all privileged to be in that place where we benefit from tech, we use tech, we see it all the time. And yet there are so many people who aren't in the same place that we are, right? feels like, why is nobody using tech to try to solve some of the really hard things? Like having another social network, not really going to save the world. Or, you know, whatever technology you're building, it feels like there are some really, really hard things in the world that we're not focusing on. And maybe that's because there's no money in it, or there's no reward, whatever that looks like. It's just, we know the power of technology, right? We've seen how it changes everyone's lives. And it could be such a force for good, but somehow it isn't quite doing the things it should. But I don't know how to solve that. It's just a thing I think about.
No, go ahead.
There's some really good examples of companies that I think have attempted to tackle spaces. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is Kiva Loans, the original microloan center. They solved a really difficult problem of financing marginalized populations across the world using technology, using things like phones to be able to instigate microloans. Even they have fallen into incentivizing behavior they didn't mean to incentivize. For example, they have experienced many situations where people who are borrowers have experienced violence because people know that they're borrowers and they have more money, to the extent of people dying because of receiving a Kiva loan. Total unintended consequence, but Kiva is aware of that and is trying to make situations safer for people by providing more infrastructure and providing more guidance on how to be able to use the money in sort of discrete ways, which are horrible problems to have to solve, yet they're taking them face on, and they're saying, this is something that we're doing that's really great. It had some unintentional consequences that we didn't anticipate. Now that those consequences are present, we're going to try to grapple with those and come up with solutions.
Yeah. So I think the thing that we can all potentially do is try to get tech, not get tech in the hands of all of those outliers and all of those people that are being harmed, but get them involved in tech somehow, right? Whether it's getting them involved in building tech or using it or involved in the products, or, you know, if we can give them a voice to what's happening to them, we can make better decisions, you know, as we're kind of implementing and building things, or maybe they can start implementing and building things too.
I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions. I think we have a floating microphone out there. If anyone has any questions for the panel, now's the time. Kimberly? Oh, Naomi's going to grab the...
I can yell. Katrina, did you ever get your promotion?
I did not. Wow. I did not.
Wow.
It was a different role entirely. Thank you for asking.
Quiet bunch.
You have these two up here and you have no questions for them.
Kimberly?
Steve, do you have an ethics group within Resilience Scale at all? Or do you plan on making?
I have one full-time employee, and it's me. So yes, we do.
He's starting small, from the ground up.
Congratulations.
Well, if there are no questions, thank you so much.
Who?
Oh, we've got one?
It's Alex.
Oh, Alex.
In the back, the very back.
It's camouflaged by the wall.
I couldn't tell if he was stretching.
Hi, Alex Williams of the News Stack. Thank you very much for this discussion. It brings up a lot of, I think, issues that we all face, and I think, in particular, you know, I'm curious about the smaller actions, because it does seem so almost impossible to solve in many ways. But what are some of the small, tiny actions that you've seen that can almost treat it as like software development, that those incremental changes that can make a difference in terms of not just internally, but in how you communicate externally as well?
So one of the things, I've got a group of friends in London who think about and tweet about and write about ethics quite a lot. And one of the things that they've been trying to drive is encouraging companies to choose somewhere kind of where you're hosting your data. We talked about data centers briefly. So trying to force or encourage companies to choose data centers that are running on renewable energy, essentially. It sounds like such a small thing, but one of the talks yesterday in the Cloud Foundry 101 session was, what is the cloud? Like, it's someone else's computer. And we sort of think, we're running our things on the cloud, it's just away from us. But we mentioned like data centers are huge and they take huge amounts of energy, and a simple choice is to like choose data centers that are running on renewable energy, for example. So that sounds like a small thing to do. It doesn't take very much effort. It doesn't cost any more. I think that's the thing. It's always trying to make those choices that are easy without having, you know, additional cost that people might push back on. That kind of a choice is a simple enough thing to do that is maybe one step. Like say, it's all small steps, but maybe that's one.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important that everybody can acknowledge those small steps. I think we've seen too many cases, especially on like social media platforms, where something's pretty good, but it's not good enough. And so it ends up getting blown up, right? And it could have been handled in a much more constructive way. Like there was a lot of good things. It could have been a good learning experience if we just all kind of stopped and acknowledged what was good about it before we started talking about what was bad about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Is that an incremental thing that can be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just all need to do it when we see it happening, right? I mean, that's how change happens. You just start changing your own behavior, and then other people will probably notice that too.
Right. It's like choosing a recyclable straw.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a very small step forward, but it's something.
The smallest thing that I try to do is stop myself from othering. I'm in tech, you're not in tech, therefore we can't talk about tech. Which is bananas, again, given that tech is so pervasive in 2019. And we tend to have this, I find myself in situations where that othering happens monumentally and in very small details. I like to think of myself as just solving problems, and I use technology to do that, but everyone uses technology to do that. The other day I was talking to my team, and we were talking about, they were complaining about users who are non-technical and how it's difficult to educate users on a technical product. And I said, if a surgeon were to walk in right now, would you say, your job's not complicated because it's not technical, so you couldn't possibly understand what we do? And they said, well, a surgeon's technical. Really? What if they're not using a robot? What if they're using their hands? What makes them technical versus not technical? And I just try to keep that in mind in my interactions every day, that I personally don't take it as an accomplishment of being technical or not technical. I take it as an accomplishment that I solved a problem for a person today. And hopefully that problem is for many people, or whatever the case might be. The instrument that I used for that was technology. People have all sorts of instruments. And when we say that I'm technical and you're not, it stops us from collaborating. And people have lots of really great ideas on how to solve technical problems, but they're not even allowed into the conversation because they're not seen as members of the tech community.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
So in summary, awareness, people, and perspective.
Ooh. App.
Let's push it.
We like acronyms. Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go.
That one.
All right, everyone. That's it. Thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of Summit.